Hi, everyone. This is Scott Rose, President of ModelOp, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, Operationalize the AI Model Lifecycle. Before we jump in, let me briefly cover some background on logistics. First, about our company. ModelOp provides the industry's only enterprise-class software solely focused on ModelOps, a critical new business capability for organizations scaling AI. Our customers use ModelOps solutions to drive transformational value from their AI investments by accelerating the deployment of models into business in a well-governed, consistent manner at scale. Now let me introduce our two speakers, Mike Gualtieri and Stu Bailey. Mike is Vice President and Principal Analyst for Forrester Research, where he covers artificial intelligence and related data technologies. Stu is ModelOps co-founder and CTO, building on 2 decades as an enterprise software entrepreneur focused on analytic and data-intensive distributed systems. Before I hand it over to Mike and Stu, let me go over a few webinar logistics. Please feel free to send us your questions throughout the session via the Questions tab in your console or at the email learn@modelop.com. We'll save time at the end to answer as many as possible, and the webinar is being recorded, and a copy of the webinar and slides will be available after the presentation is over. With that, it is my pleasure to welcome our first speaker, Mike Gualtieri, who will kick us off with his perspective on the market and why ModelOps is not optional. Mike?
Hi, everyone. This is Mike Gualtieri, Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. I cover artificial intelligence and machine learning platforms. What I'd like to talk to you today about is how to operationalize AI with model operations. It's all about enterprise artificial intelligence. We see that firms are increasingly adopting it, and they want to scale the number of use cases. Our data shows that about 54% of enterprises report that they're implementing some form of artificial intelligence, and we expect that number to rise to about 90% of enterprises in the next 5 years. Artificial intelligence is real and ready, and we're not talking about the science fiction version of artificial intelligence here. We're talking about pragmatic artificial intelligence, things that enterprises can and are doing today. And most of it is based upon machine learning technology. We also believe that enterprises must prioritize AI in order to be leaders in their industry. Artificial intelligence can help companies make predictions, can act in real time. There's numerous use cases. In fact, we believe there's thousands of potential use cases across global enterprises. If you think of every single business process in an enterprise, there's a potential use case, one or more use cases within those business processes. If you think about use cases in customer experiences and customer journeys, there's a potential use case in all those touch points. And in fact, we're already seeing many companies are using artificial intelligence for most customer experience and business process. And we're not just talking about the internet giants, we're talking about also global enterprises. Now, the key issue that they're having now is scaling more use cases. And data scientists, they build the models. Data science teams can build those models. Application developers can infuse applications with AI models, but they struggle to do it at scale. I would say that the predominant way that enterprises deploy models today is swivel chair collaboration. And you know what? You can get away with that with a few use cases, but when you want to scale to dozens or hundreds of use cases, it's a key issue. And in fact, our data shows that data scientists, one of their key complaints is that their models do not get operationalized. They don't make it to production. A key complaint among business leaders is not enough use cases are getting to production. Everyone wants more of these models to get into production. And that is a key issue that we have today. Now, it's all about models, but it's not just about machine learning models. Artificial intelligence is not comprised of one particular technology. Rather, it's comprised of building block technologies. Now, front and center is machine learning, because machine learning analyzes data to create predictive models, to predict what a customer wants, predict customer churn, predict when a machine might fail. predict characteristics about a customer that you can then use to sell more to that customer. So machine learning is certainly a huge technology in artificial intelligence, but there are also adjacent technologies that are also models. Mathematical optimization, sometimes called operations research, sometimes called mixed integer programming, are also models that often ride with machine learning models. So for example, you could have a machine learning model predict that there's going to be a disruption in the supply chain, but then what do you do about it? Well, you could use mathematical optimization to determine the best solution, the least costly solution, while at the same time meeting delivery commitments. And then there's also business rules, sometimes known as decision models that encapsulate human expressed decision processes. So for example, you could have a machine learning model that makes a decision about whether you should make a loan, but you can have a decision model that says, I don't want the machine learning making a decision on any loan over $1 million. So these technologies are often used in conjunction, and I call this the perfect AI tech team. But the point here is that artificial intelligence is not just about one model. It can be comprised of multiple different model types. And you will hear some people call ModelOps, they might call it MLOps for machine learning operations. The reason why we call it ModelOps or model operations is because it's broader. We think it's broader than just machine learning. There's other types of AI technologies that go with it. Now, the other factor that exacerbates the problem of operationalizing models is the plethora of tools that data science teams use. You cannot, well, I don't want to say you can't, but enterprises are not standardizing on one particular type of data science platform. They probably have SAS. They might have some Python development. They might have some newer AutoML tool. And we think that enterprises will continue to use multiple tools because there's multiple types of models. There's a lot of innovation occurring, both commercially and in the open source space. And so data scientists, knowledge engineers, business analysts, they center themselves around what we call model factories. And model factories are based on the tools they use. So any ModelOps platform is going to have to be able to support these multiple tools that enterprises have. In fact, we divide the market for machine learning tools into three categories, and we believe that enterprises will have at least one of these. Most of them already have multimodal and notebook-based. So they might use a notebook-based to do some Python and a Jupyter notebook. They might use a multimodal tool, something like a RapidMiner or KNIME, open source. Automation focused, they might use something like a Data Robot or H2O or other automation tools. And there's a need and a use for all of these tools within the enterprise to build models. So firms are going to need some unifying force. ModelOps is that unifying force to manage this many-to-many relationship between the tools and the applications for which they have to get deployed. We call this ModelOps, and it has to be repeatable. So ModelOps is a capability that's offered, that's served up by some software. It's a repeatable, scalable process to stage, move, monitor, and govern model assets for production application and consumption. So essentially, it is that many-to-many conduit. It allows models created in the various factories and the various different types of models to get moved to applications. But it's not so simple because we're talking about models. And there's a feedback loop, and there's also monitoring of models in production. So it's a lot more complicated than just moving code. Machine learning models are probabilistic. Code is deterministic. So by its very nature, it requires a unique process. Now, when we look at a lot of the moving parts in making applications happen, and especially AI-infused applications, we have a new team. We have a new path here. We have data engineers working with data scientists, create these machine learning models and other types of models. But we also have the very familiar business app design, development, DevOps teams as well. Now, at the end of the line in these production applications, you have to infuse these models, which are developed in a separate process with separate tools and potentially many different tools. ModelOps provides that unifying force. And we think that the role of ModelOps engineer is emerging to handle that. Now, when we look at what are the requirements for a ModelOps capability, we've been analyzing this market for years. And based upon that, we've developed these 7 key requirements. The first one is to be able to move models from various model factories to production. So this is that many-to-many problem. You're not just moving necessarily a standardized model. These models could be created in many different types of platforms. So the ModelOps process has to be model aware, and it has to be able to move those models to production inside of those production applications. Models are probabilistic. That means that they may drift in their performance. They may lose their accuracy. So models absolutely have to be monitored in production to make sure they're still performing, abiding by any regulatory requirements, and certainly not doing any harm to the business by making poor predictions or poor decisions. So a ModelOps capability has to be very, very model aware. And that means being machine learning model aware. That means being decision model aware. And has to be able to monitor that. And not just statistically, because you'll hear people say, oh yes, we model the monitors for drift. That's a statistical measure. That's essential. But what about KPIs? Business KPIs, because that's what really matters. ModelOps has to support not only the multiple types of models, but also multiple formats. So there are some standards out there. PMML has been around for a long time. That's a key standard. That stands for Predictive Modeling Markup Language. That's one way that a model gets expressed. There's newer standards emerging for things like deep learning, Onyx, for example. And then there's Python, and then there's all different formats. So ModelOps has to be format aware. And part of the problem of a ModelOps capability inside one of the model factories, the tools in data science, is usually they're only aware of themselves. But AI solutions are comprised of multiple models and multiple formats. It also has to support the dependencies. Models are data dependent. So they have to have connections to any reference data that doesn't come into the calling payload. There may also be a lot of open source dependency, many different versions, all right? So this becomes sort of a versioning nightmare, not just of the model, but versioning of the dependencies and the environments that need to be spun up to actually support the running, the scoring or inferencing use of the model. Deployment freedom is also critical. Models aren't just running on a big server. They're not just running in the cloud. They're not just running on the edge. They potentially, depending upon the use case, have to run on all 3 of these type of environments. So ModelOps can't be, the deployment vehicle can't be oversimplified. So for example, the model's behind an API. Well, that's great for some applications, but not if you're batch scoring 1 million records. It might have to support batch. It may have to support an edge device. So ModelOps capability also has to offer the deployment freedom to deploy models where the application code lives and where it needs to run. ModelOps, I guess you could say that this is probably the overarching capability, right, is to govern models, to maintain the lineage. Where did that model come from? Remember, these models could be making, and most likely are making, very critical business decisions. And you want to make sure you absolutely know the lineage of that model, where it came from, that it's not, that it's actually the model that was meant for production, that it's not an old version. So you have to be able to govern the lineage, the data that was used, the model that was used. Explanations. You know, model explainability isn't just during the development, but during production as well. Certainly auditability, how much the model's been called, and also governing the business outcomes, which is also tied into monitoring. And then finally, ModelOps capability should have a beautiful and highly usable user interface for multiple roles to collaborate. So we have the ModelOps professional, but there's also other people that have dependencies on these models, DevOps, Ops, and even data scientists. So, you know, you don't want some sort of command line capability. You want a beautiful, usable, enterprise quality user interface that's a single pane of glass on all of these capabilities. So ModelOps, we think, is it's becoming a hot topic, and the reason is simple. Enterprises do want to scale the number of use cases, but they can't scale those use cases unless they have a ModelOps capability that's highly repeatable, that supports multiple model factories infused in many different types of applications. So that's why our advice is to do ModelOps to scale your AI. Thank you.
And thank you, Mike, for really that compelling perspective on why ModelOps is critical for enterprises. As a reminder, please submit questions either through the Zoom console or via email to learn@modelop.com. Next, it's my pleasure to welcome Stu Bailey, ModelOps co-founder and CTO, who will share with us how we are helping customers to scale enterprise AI with ModelOps. Stu?
Thanks, Scott, and thanks, Mike. At ModelOp, we do exactly what Mike said. We've solved the problems of getting models into business. I couldn't have said it better than Mike. I think the industry is starting to really understand what those models are. I think a key takeaway is these are business challenges as much as mathematical and technical challenges. Mike and others and our customers and who we engage with and how we see the market evolving has really defined ModelOps clearly. You know, the deployment, monitoring, and governing of models. And again, I couldn't recommend more kind of Mike's, your explanation of the key requirements, as well as the driving business factors for requiring a ModelOps capability in a large enterprise in their journey toward enterprise AI. And I would say personally, this looks like one of the most transformative journeys the large enterprise has embarked on in the last couple decades. And ModelOps, as you described it, Mike, really is emerging, and that's clear to us both in our customer base and who we interact with in the market in general, as that organizing principle or unifying force, as you mentioned, to coordinate the activities, but also the investments and the growth of enterprise AI. So ModelOps is both becoming and is well-defined, as well as strategic in its placement in the large enterprise. At ModelOp, this is what we do. I mean, this is what we've been doing since 2016 when we were founded, and many of us in the team have deep backgrounds in operationalizing AI and ML, stretching all the way back to some of the earliest efforts for operationalizing models around, say, model interchange formats. But we've been focused since 2016 on the modern AI journey in the large, complex enterprise. We have a lot of experience in financial services and insurance, but we're certainly not exclusive to that. You know, pharma and manufacturing are important areas that are really embracing the enterprise AI journey in our and investments in our experience. And at ModelOp, this is what we do: get models into business, operationalize them, and provide an organizing principle as well as an organizing solution for those models to participate in a full model ops lifecycle and be accountable to the business, to the data scientists, and to all the technologists and other stakeholders that are required. So we deliver this ModelOps solution. I'll talk about our ModelOps Center, which is the key artifact that makes it all very, very concrete. And I think you'll find if you engage with us to help you and your enterprise start to develop or accelerate or better organize an existing ModelOps capability, you'll find that we really have a unique set of skills on our team, from all the important stakeholder skill sets, data science, data ops, IT ops, et cetera, as well as the expertise to help the business understand how to analyze a ModelOps investment and really track the returns from a business perspective. I want to start with that. Again, I can't highlight enough that ModelOps as a capability in our experience is a business accountable capability. It's solving a business problem that happens to be very, very technical. So one of the first things we often do with a customer is help them define, and these are some examples, but certainly not exhaustive, and may not be the particular KPIs needed for any given enterprise, but we help an enterprise define the key performance indicators that really measure baseline those key requirements and capabilities that ModelOps defines: deployment, monitoring, governance, but also can be the foundation for measuring the value of investing in a ModelOps capability over time. So for example, on the left, this could be a business impact type KPI that also has a lot of accountability to the technical journey of models. How long does it take a model to come off a model factory? That could be a Jupyter, an RStudio, or a Dataiku, or a Data Robot, or H2O, or SAS. How long does it take to get that model from the model factory into a fully productionalized, continuous 24/7 operation that can have a full life cycle, ModelOps life cycle, and provide that core value to the top line? How long does that take? Then the next one could be, once a model is in production, what kind of performance is it and efficacy is the model providing in terms of its production value? And key indicators like how often do we refresh a model can often be a factor for something like model performance decay. Like you might have a credit card customer acquisition model that maybe has been in, and it gets updated every year or so, or every 6 months. But it's clear in the modern environment that the amount of decay that that model experiences with that kind of refresh cycle would go down dramatically, and therefore have a high level of potential gain in the business if it could be refreshed more quickly. We want to be able to baseline those things and be very quantitative about them. So again, we can see the benefit of a ModelOps capability. And then final example here, again, these are just examples of key KPIs, is what kind of risk or exposure to this particular models provide to the business. I mean, if this model is wrong, is it a trade facing the wrong way? Or if there's a regulatory issue, what does that mean for the business? Or maybe it's a supply chain problem. So what kind of exposure do these models actually in very concrete ways exposed to the business, and how do we govern that? And so these are the types of KPIs that in our experience, even in organizations that have a good handle on maybe a type of operationalizing of legacy models, that in the journey for enterprise AI, there's a lot of room for improvement and a need to kind of baseline that. In order to make that very concrete, we need an organizing principle that is actually an automation, a foundation for automation. In general, if model ops cannot be automated, then it really won't be able to fulfill the promise of the overall enterprise AI journey. And so at ModelOp, we provide ModelOps Center, which is a software solution that interfaces with the model factories, the data platforms, the IT services, the consuming applications, but most importantly, provides those key requirements that Mike highlighted: deployment, governance, and monitoring services, as well as that single pane of glass so that the organization can interact with every model that's in business 24/7, and all the key stakeholders can be coordinated in their response to models as issues come up or different times in their model lifecycle are required. Maybe a model needs to be refreshed, but before that can be done, certain approvals have to happen. Or maybe in a model's ModelOp lifecycle, certain regulatory reports have to be created, or other key metrics have to be tested in terms of its overall lifecycle. ModelOps Center provides that key concrete software solution that allows for that automation to happen at scale in the large enterprise. Mike talked a lot about roles. And I would say in our experience, once there's a very clear path toward a ModelOps capability and a solution that can make that very concrete, like ModelOps Center, then very key roles emerge. Mike talked about one, the ModelOps role, which is really responsible for using a tool like ModelOps Center to coordinate all of the activities around models that are in production, from the line of business owners all the way through to compliance and risk officers and all the technical and mathematical stakeholders in between. But also the enterprise AI architect emerges. That person who is really responsible for the model lifecycle definition in a concrete way for all the different models and the different patterns of models in the enterprise. So when we put that all together with ModelOp and our ModelOps Center, large enterprises get a very concrete solution that allows the newer roles to interact with something that is specific and not just general guidelines. So for example, the enterprise AI architect can use ModelOps Center as almost like a CAD program, allowing the definition. We have a low code process management definition piece, allowing that definition to be instantiated and automated, including approvals, workflows, and other requirements for the ModelOps lifecycle that can all be defined very concretely. And the ModelOps teams can use ModelOp Command Center and the ModelOps Center functionality to bring in and coordinate all of the key stakeholders for every model in the enterprise. Let me just go a little deeper into some of those to give you kind of a concrete example. And I encourage you, there's a lot of more on our website, or you can engage with directly for demos or other deeper technical involvement with ModelOps Center. But let me kind of give you the overview. So first is that Command Center, that 24/7 single pane of glass that the ModelOps roles can see how many models in business, which lines of business they're accountable to, and which business functions specifically. Are those, how many are Python models? How many are R models? How many models might be experiencing problems in production, whether those be technical problems in terms of where they're being run, the runtime or execution environment, their integration with business software, could be statistical problems. It could be, again, business metrics or governance issues. So the ModelOps team needs that single pane of glass to know right now, today, where are the models and how are they performing? And those kind of key performance indicators that allow them to activate the processes to triage or refresh or whatever that might be for each model. The deployment services for ModelOps Center are truly unique and comprehensive. I mentioned before the AI architects can actually design in a very instantiated, automated way, full ModelOps life cycles, which include registration processes, exactly what data scientists have to do to ensure that their models get into business as fast as possible, no matter what tools they're using. Governance processes, any kind of auditing or approvals that have to happen, all of the runtime matching and the myriad of often challenging technical alignment problems. All of these can be detailed in an automated process on a per model or per model pattern basis. And the enterprise architect can do that and then start to allow the data ops and data scientists and IT ops to play their part in an automatic journey, in an as automated as possible journey of models into production. And that's really the deployment services. And then once they're in production, there are monitoring services. We have to know not only how the model's doing from a performance or efficacy perspective, but really across the three spectrums of critical monitoring in 24/7 model ops capabilities. The business monitoring, like how well is it performing? The statistical monitor, in terms of the overall line of business, the statistical monitoring, efficacy, in terms of the algorithm that's required, and allow the data scientists that created that model to understand exactly how it's performing in business when it's actually deployed. And that can be a challenge. Sometimes a model is performing well for months, and the data scientist has gone on to build other models and needs a very fast way to see exactly how their model is not only performing, but allow them to understand the details of that very quickly. And then finally, the technical monitoring, where is it in the IT landscape? How is it performing in terms of resource consumption? And all of those, monitoring capabilities must be laid on top of existing investments in IT, in data substrates, and model factories. So really providing a unified way to monitor models, no matter where they came from or exactly all the technical details for getting them into business. And finally, and often most differentiated and really most strategic in terms of the model ops capability and our ModelOps Center solution is model governance. Models are a thing. They are not quite software. They are certainly like software, a special type of software, but they have a different relationship to intellectual property. They have a different relationship to data, and often have a different relationship to the business than traditional enterprise software. And so being able to have a robust model catalog, knowing exactly where all the models are and where they came from is critical in the ModelOps capability, as Mike mentioned. End-to-end lineage, so we can understand exactly what happened with a model in its full life cycle and full ModelOps life cycle, and provide full auditability, and things like interpretability and fairness and other stress testing and regulation requirements. All of these should be encoded in a very concrete way in a ModelOps solution, and ModelOps Center allows for that kind of accountability to the business and tie into any other business processes that are required to allow an enterprise to move forward on their enterprise journey. So that's a quick overview of ModelOps Center, and hopefully that will entice you to engage with us and learn more about ModelOps Center. I just want to quickly kind of mention a use case to put it into some perspective. I think Mike, again, talked a lot about the types of use cases. Here's one with electronic communications, being able to monitor whether something is in compliance. All communications are in compliance. This happens to be a financial services use case. I won't read all the slide. You can look at that. But I'll direct your attention to the right side of the slide, where you can see where ModelOps Center is involved in the ModelOps lifecycle for the whole model as it gets into business. ModelOps Center takes the model from that exploration part of the model factory and deploys it into a operational context that allows it to be in a champion challenger type situation. So it can not only be updated frequently, it can be updated when needed. And then finally integrated into a scoring mechanism that's fully integrated into the compliance desk. And as you know, this is a really excellent use case for AI in the large enterprise, because it's challenging to scale e-communications as we have more and more of that, and we can't afford, and most enterprises cannot afford to have a lot of false positives, but they can't allow to have, it's very expensive to have anything get through. So it's a very good use case for AI in general, and ModelOps Center allows for not only a seamless deployment of the models in this particular use case, but also the appropriate feedback mechanism so that all the the constituent stakeholders can continue to improve both the model and the overall process and its effectiveness to the business. You can see some of the specifics in this particular use case. Models that come from model factories using TensorFlow and XGBoost, the types of statistical monitoring, as I mentioned, that do champion and challenger. And then finally, the governance features that are really important for this particular use case has to do with versioning, reproducibility, and lineage. If you're interested in this, we're happy to share more with you in various details. And we have many more use cases that you can explore on our website and in other areas. So I encourage you to come to both our web property and to engage with us as a company. We really are, I think, the best company in the world to help a large organization organize and instantiate a ModelOps capability, and we look forward to helping you.
Great, so thank you, Stu, and of course, Mike, for sharing your insights on ModelOps. As a reminder, and you see the email address for questions. We're going to shift to Q&A, and you can also submit questions over the Zoom console. For this part, we're also going to have Dave Trier, the ModelOp VP of Solutions, join the webinar. So Stu, the first question we have, I'm going to throw to you, and it's pretty open-ended. How do we get started with ModelOps?
It's a great question, Scott. So there's several different ways, at ModelOp, we have different engagement models to help a large organization. We're very focused and laser focused on the very large enterprise. We're very sensitive to all of the challenges of getting anything started in the very large enterprise. And so we have everything from assessments to quick pilots and POCs. But I would say the overall kind of way to get started is choose one or two lines of businesses that are really embrace AI in terms of its effectiveness and AI models in terms of effectiveness, and start getting all the folks aligned who are required to get models not only into business, but governed from a business process perspective all the way through all the challenging technical issues, and just start with that and start developing, or even, and we find often a large enterprise has several key capabilities that is required for ModelOps, but they're just not all organized in the ModelOps way that Mike mentioned, or that we have found most effective in our customer base, or they don't have as instantiated concrete solution as ModelOps Center. So start with one or two lines of businesses. Don't do big bang enterprise right at first, and make it an incremental and strategic journey that is self-justified from both a business and budget perspective, as well as a technical reinforcement that, yes, this is actually helping along the way.
All right, great. And I think a follow-up question that I would add to this one, and it came through over email, but I think is a good follow-up, is what are the main pitfalls that you've seen with our customers out in the market as they're trying to start this journey to scale enterprise AI?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, I think it's a pretty common question, and within the last couple of months, I think I helped develop a Pitfalls document, which is, I think, available on our website and through some of the analyst channels. So I'll just cover a couple of them. I could talk for a long time on the pitfalls from our experience over the last 3 years in doing ModelOps for large enterprises. But a key one is assuming that your DevOps capability will suffice for ModelOps. That's a pretty classic pitfall. And so, we have helped organizations just understand how the DevOps, CI/CD, and software delivery capability in large enterprise certainly should be leveraged to the maximum degree, but also what is missing from that needs to be augmented to give a full ModelOps capabilities. Because as I mentioned before, models aren't, they're a different type of software than traditional business software. And their relationships to both data, artifacts, and the business are different. So don't assume that your DevOps capability will suffice to be your ModelOps capability. That's kind of pitfall one. And I'll just highlight one other one, which is also a source of confusion that we often help our customers understand, which is a pitfall is hoping that that data science machine learning workbench will provide enterprise ready model governance. Like that it's, you know, there are a lot of model factories. There are a lot of excellent model factories out there. There are model factories that focus on, you know, citizen data science or automated search of algorithms and hyperparameter spaces. There are others that are more focused on the ETL process or EDA process, others that really focus on a particular type of model like time series, right? And all that is a very challenging problem to solve. And there are very many good tools. ModelOps as a capability, as Mike mentioned, and I think you'll, you know, what we've seen in our customer base and how the market is organizing is really a different challenge. And we don't see that, and the very definition of ModelOps is that it's agnostic to the data science workbenches and then model factories. So hoping that the model factory provide a full-blown enterprise-ready model governance and model ops capability is really a pitfall to avoid.
Great, thank you, Stu. And there was a question that came in, I think is a good follow-up to that. I'm gonna give Stu a break and ask Dave to address this one. So the question is, can you speak more to model development? Specifically, how does ModelOps help with the dev, test, prod model lifecycle over the same data repositories? So Dave?
Great, that's an excellent question. It's actually a very timely one. We just had a discussion with one of the largest Fortune 100 companies just earlier today about this. And really the first thing I would say is that ModelOps in general actually helps to streamline all of the latter portions of the overall life cycle. So beyond just the development to actually providing and automating the ability to do reproducible testing and eventually deployment and monitoring. And so what that does is it actually frees up your model developers from having to do the basic monitoring and I would call plumbing of just making sure your models are running in production. ModelOps provides that out of the gate so your model developers can actually focus on, well, actual model creation. So that was the first thing I would say. Now, from a software perspective, we help to do a couple things. One, we provide plugins to allow you to register your model regardless of the model factory so that you get all those capabilities from a governance and monitoring perspective that Stu mentioned. But then second, we do have that low-code automation engine that Stu mentioned that allows us to take the model. Once the data scientist says that model's ready, it's good to go, I run it locally, I believe it's a good candidate model, our low-code automation engine takes that model and runs it through all the steps that are required for your robust testing, integration, compliance, regulatory, again, so that the data scientists and model developers don't have to spend their time on doing all those steps that are required in the process to get into business. So I'll just pause there and invite Stu to add in anything else on that.
Yeah, I'll also just say, I think there's some question about the data, you know, it's just, again, to highlight that one of the key needs for ModelOps, it comes from the fact that the requirements for each model is driven by the business needs, and that even the data science requirements are often very unique to a particular type of business. And so so unlike traditional enterprise software, it really creates a requirement for ModelOps to treat every model individually in terms of its relationship with where it came from, as Dave mentioned, but also the data. You know, some of the models for this particular, some of the data for this particular model that's used in training might come from this data source, right? Maybe it comes from Databricks or a Hadoop cluster. When it's in production, actually, it may be scoring against data that's coming across a Kafka queue or that is even stored in an Oracle database. So being able to have the flexibility to move models in production and have interactions with data on a per key capability for ModelOps, and something ModelOps Center provides natively.
Great, thank you, Stu. And Dave, I'm going to follow up. There were a couple more questions that came in specific to our software ModelOps Center. So the first one, you know, how does ModelOps Center manage champion challenger processes?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, it's one of the most commonly requested capabilities across our enterprise customers. They're really looking for a consistent way to compare candidate models against what's currently running in production. And really our software, again, called ModelOps Center, provides a robust out-of-the-box champion challenger mechanism that allows for a side-by-side comparison of all the business, statistical, and technical metrics that Stu and Mike talked about earlier for the challenger model against the current production model. Now, ModelOps Center, we automatically compute these metrics in the controlled environment that you have. So not on the desktop, but in that controlled environment that you have that's InfoSec approved, that's similar to what's going to be run in production using your approved golden data sets. We do that as part of the operationalization process. So again, just providing a automated and consistent way to compare what you would like to put into production versus what you are actually having into production as part of our champion challenger capability.
All right, and then one more product question, Dave, around model metadata and what the product supports.
Yeah, absolutely. Another great question. And this is actually where the foundation of our software starts, is having a very robust and rich set of metadata about all the elements that compose a model. Yes, of course, it's the name of the model, it's the actual model code itself, but that's not actually everything that is required to run the model. You need to know what are the schemas of the data that's coming in and out. You need to know what dependent libraries are required to run that model, what version of Python, which helper libraries are required. You need to know how that model was trained, how that model was tested. So all those elements are what we collect throughout the life cycle of the model into our robust representation of the model, and then ultimately surface that up through our model catalog so that you can have a really clear and deep view of all that models across the organization, what they are composed of, and ultimately how you can reproduce those and leverage and monitor them over time.
All right, one last question, really follow up to Stu's earlier answer around the question of how to get started. And Stu, I'll throw this one back to you in terms of the journey and how long it takes. So could you give a sense from some of our customer experience, how long kind of the initial work and then kind of building incrementally as you talked about, what does that cycle time look like?
Sure. Yeah, in our experience, I mean, it's not unusual from really first engagement to really have a first pass at ModelOps capabilities supporting, say 2 to 10 models in production within, a few 2 to 4 months. And so this is something that can be done very, very quickly, especially relative to the general cadence in the large enterprise. And I think it's one of the differentiators in terms of ModelOp, our company, and our understanding of how the large enterprise works, both from a technical organization, but as well as a business transformation and business process perspective. And we have a methodology, if you will, and proven cadence to help get an organization get started, within a quarter or two, and then start to expand not only the number of models and sophistication of the ModelOps lifecycle, but also the different lines of business and its place in the strategic center of the AI journey. And again, I think you'll find we're kind of uniquely capable of helping large organizations think about this kind of very transformative enterprise AI journey, this very foundational ModelOps capability, but instantiating that very concretely across all those stakeholders with, it all is about the models, starting with real models that make a difference in the business.
Great, thank you, Stu. And thank you again, not just to Stu, but to Mike Gualtieri and Dave, and certainly to all of you for joining the webinar today. So if you have any additional questions that come to mind, please, again, email us at learn@modelop.com. You can also visit our website, modelop.com, of course, and follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Vimeo, and Facebook. And, of course, course, we'd also be thrilled to meet with you individually and your teams and talk more about ModelOps and helping your organization in their journey to scale enterprise AI. So thank you again, and have a great